Is this thing on? Hello, hello, everybody. We're back. We're back. We are back from a long hiatus. It is me, Karina, back in your speakers, back hearing you. Thank you for everybody that's either watching this video or is listening. Subscribe, like all those type of stuff. Um, where do I start? I want to say that one of the main reasons I decided to start press and pins was to take high level information and bring it down to why you need to know it. So high keys that may be too wordy and they may have all these big, we'll say words and blah blah blah. And to bring it down to this is why you need to know it. We are a fashion podcast for seamstresses. That's what we do. And even if you love fashion, you're also welcome here. But that's our main drive. That's the main point of this podcast right here. And I want to say that because in this podcast, in this episode, excuse me, in particular, we will be discussing politics. Like, excuse me. I don't know how else to put it, how else to phrase it. We will be discussing podcasts. I'm not, we will be discussing politics and maybe some podcasts in between. But it's mainly because there's political information that affects you and you need to understand it and you need to be able to grasp it. And one thing that I am very talented at, I don't even mean to honk my own horn, but I'm really good at taking information and bringing it down to the level of and serving it to people as to this is why you need to understand this. Because one thing that has been so frustrating within these last couple of weeks was within these last couple of months is people wanting to separate politics and people wanting to say, oh, we shouldn't talk about politics, just stick to basketball, just stick to fashion, just stick to your sector of what you know and what you're good at. And the point of having a sector and being a expert in what you are the expert in is because you know about it, right? You, which we may not respect experts at this time, but it's because you know about it. So you know everything that encases that one subject. So despite what people may tell you, fashion, and I say this all the time, and I want to make sure you hear me when I say this. So I'm going to keep on repeating it. Fashion and politics go hand in hand. Fashion and politics interact with each other on a daily basis. Fashion is influenced by politics. And that's literally it. So, for example, during this episode, at the very end, we're going to talk about the state of fashion within 2025. Business of Fashion comes out with this long PDF form, not a form, a long PDF file, and essentially is a thesis, a paper of these are what fashion executives are looking at within 2025. The very first thing that we're going to talk about within this episode at the end is global economics because that affects you. And let me break it down in ways where you'll understand just a little bit more, a little bit better. If you are a seamstress, global economics affects you because it affects what fabrics you get. It affects what textiles you get. If you are a consumer, which we all are, especially if you're a consumer of fashion, a fashion enthusiast, global economics affects the price you're going to pay for something. It affects where that thing is made, which also affects the quality of it. And then if you're just a small business designer and you're just making things for your clients and you're just making these little one-off things, global economics and politics in general affects what your consumers are going to want. They may not know it directly affects it, but we do. So that's why we're here. And I feel like I came in really strong. Did I introduce myself? I feel like I did. But we're gonna go ahead and dive into the episode. I will also say before we get into it, please make sure you are taking care of yourself. Stay offline for a little bit if you need to. Um, all of that mental health advice, please make sure you listen to others as they try to advise you if it's good, of course. So the first thing we're going to talk about is our textile tea. This is what we typically always start our episodes off to everybody who is just now listening within the new year. And if you are just now listening, okay, girls, boys, and these, I do not come off that strong all the time. I, mm, I do not. I do not. I do not. I have just been watching the last couple of months unfold, and I took a quick hiatus from the podcast, and I've just been like, whew, we have a lot to talk about. We have a lot to talk about. But first thing we're going to talk about is our textile tea. If you're watching the video and you see me with this notepad, these are my show notes. And don't worry, you can view these on our Instagram, which on, on our Instagram, if you can read my handwriting, feel free to look at the notes, see how I guess mine works or how things connect, or you can just follow along. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is the history of linen. Last episode or of our previous episode, we talked about flax, and we're doing this to talk about the root of fibers and where they came from, not the secondhand fabric store, which you should be shopping at, but fibers in general. So when we look at linen across the board, there is one group of people that we have to study because they perfected linen. And I give you a little guess, one, two, three, it's the Egyptians. The Egyptians perfected, when I say perfected linen, they perfected linen. And let's talk about why. Because some people think that, or studies will show you, some people believe that don't study fashion or textiles in general, that linen was used as a mummification process. So it helped preserve the bodies, which it did. But the Egyptians as a whole viewed linen as something that was magical. They felt like it had all of these different properties because and when they used linen, linen was money. Linen was an asset to them. This is the tradable goods that they had. So they used linen for bandages, for wrappings, and for clothing. And the way we can tell this and the way that we know this, besides historians knowing this, is when we look at the tombs that Egypt, we look at the tombs from pharaohs in Egypt, the tombs is where we can find these things that were preserved in textiles. I think around, they had one tomb and around 85% of the thousands of fabrics was linen. So from that, you can tell how these Egyptians valued linen and the weight that it held in them. Because as we know, as some may not know, Egyptians believed that you could take your things to the afterlife with you. So they believed that once you died, if your material possessions, excuse me, were not around you, you could not have it in the afterlife. So, with us knowing that and going to a tomb and seeing 85% of the fabric being linen, it tells you the weight that linen carried for them. And also, when we refer to the Egyptians perfecting linen, is that linen has different stages. If you listen to the previous episode, we talk about how flax has different stages. Linen does the same thing the same way, and they were able to capture that, know that, and then use linen for its different properties. So, like we said, linen wasn't just used for the mummification process. It was almost like a, besides of course being money, the priest the priest was essentially anointed before they could even touch this linen. So they had sacred linen, and essentially what a priest had to do, the process of mummification, well, besides when they get in there, the textile and embalming and all that type of stuff, which the Egyptians also perfected. They were the first ones to do embalming, all that type of jazz. So essentially, a priest, before he can go into this special room to wrap linen in, to wrap the mummy in this linen, because it was a special room, it was a side room, he had to shave, he had to wash himself, and he essentially had to clean himself in order to use this linen, in order to operate this linen. And that's why we say that Egyptians really perfected linen. It's really because they saw it as magical, so they treated it with the utmost care. So that's going to be our textile tea. Next episode, we are going to go into silk and the ancient trade within China, how silk was discovered. There is a old myth, an old wise tale that we will get into. And if you do ever want to follow along, this book that I am referring back to, that, like I said last episode, I tend to read it, listen to it, dive back into it at the top of the year. I like to use my year as like basics to like get down to the roots and reassociate myself with the roots of certain industries. And of course, I'm in the textile industry, so I do this. It's called The Golden Thread. So if you do want to listen to the book and you want to learn a little bit more based off what I just said, because what I said was a really quick synopsis of linen and the history of linen, um, read the book. So, for our next segment, for our new listeners, we tend to go over party fashion notes. And what party fashion notes is essentially, this is the information you need to know before you go to your party, right? What are your party fashion friends talking about? We all know the couple of fashion girlies that we hang out with that always seem to be in the know. So this is what they are talking about. This is what currently is going on in the industry. And even if you're not going to that party, you want to impress people with the information that you know. I know you. I know you, right? We like to know some stuff. This is the section. So, like I said, we're talking about politics and party fashion notes because you just can't. It would be naive of me. I would be misleading you if I said that fashion and politics don't go hand in hand, and what we can use from this political party. So I want to start this episode or this section off by saying it is okay if a fashion outlet does not want to cover the fashion of politics within this camp because they do not support them. That's okay, especially when they're actively stripping away people's rights, actively stripping away people's, I don't know, Medicaid and Medicare prices. As we're actively stripping away these things, it's okay for somebody to not want to cover this, because I've seen this a lot within the last couple of days, and they're like, oh, well, I don't understand why you're not covering the first lady's fashion. I don't understand why you're not covering this. They've been personally affected by the policies that those women, those men are supporting. It's okay to pass a story. It actually happens all the time. Like all the time. A journalist can decide, hey, I'm actually going to pass that story. You can take it over there. I just saw that with Complex talking about the $300 shoes or whatever. I'm actually a brand, a journalist before that was like, I actually passed that story. So it's interesting that you chose to pick it up because journalists are media outlets, they're media sources. So they do not have to cover everything. The same way it is okay for somebody to tell you, oh, we need diversity of the mind, but they're all hanging around the same group of people. Like it's all three idiots telling each other, yeah, that's it. Like that is okay. And the responsibility that media has to its viewers, to its consumers, is to not only cover things that they have that are in good faith. Who is going to open up the world to propaganda? Especially if they don't believe that to be true. Why would you do that? And it's okay if they don't want to cover it. You got people that are immigrants trying to cover fashion. You're like, hey, actually, you guys, I'm not going to talk about that because that party personally hurt me and I'm not going to uplift anything that they do. That's a decision. The same way that a news outlet can come in and say, we're only going to cover this side of the story. We're never gonna call them the Klan. We're gonna call them this group. The same way somebody can get up on stage, do an anti-Semitic crime or do an anti-Semitic symbol, and we can all just look the other direction. Like it's the same thing. So I really don't want to hear that. I want to start this on birthday. I don't want to hear that. The next thing we're gonna talk about is what to expect from what in fashion to expect from the politics. So what we're probably going to see over the next 4 years, if not longer, depending on the effects, is conservative values making their way into fashion. Now, what does that look like? What does that sound like? Let me break it down. When we look at let's go back a step actually. When we look at the Me Too movement and we look at when women were being sexually liberated and they were like, listen, I own my body, I own what I wear, what did we see in fashion coincide? What did we see? We saw a little bit more revealing clothes. We saw women be comfortable in their body and saying, listen, just because we no longer believe in the thing of just because I wear this means that this can happen to me. That's nothing that we believe in anymore. So I'm actually going to wear what I want to wear. Now, once we know that, and we go back to the trend forecasting that we talked about last episode, what happens? When something reaches its maximum, it comes back down. So we can wear as revealing clothes as we want to situations where they may not be the best to wear them. What's going to happen? When we see the height of something, we see the opposite slowly start to crawl up. So when we see the height of this, which we can say happened around the height of, I don't want to call it BBL fashion, but we see the height of revealing clothes, whatever. People just being comfortable in their skin, which is whatever. Which is I was going to say, which is wild to even try to rebut because well, what does it have to do with you? But what it has to do with conservatives and conservative fashion is the belief that we shouldn't be wearing all of this. We shouldn't be showing our body. We shouldn't be doing all of this. So then, as this happens, the conservative fashion, the conservative values, and the opposites start to creep their way in. We could think about it in terms of men going on podcasts and saying, oh, alpha male content. We could think of alpha male content. The opposite of alpha male content would be this femininity comment. Every time I say that, I think of Finding Nemo, and he was like anemone, no, 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 anemone. But we could think about the same thing. It goes hand in hand, right? The alpha male needs the guy, needs the girl. Eventually, women are going to pick up on that content. So we slowly start to see the rise of that. It's slowly starting to happen. We see it with trade wives, right? We see these women in we see certain trends as like the stay-at-home mom, which there's nothing wrong. I want to say there's nothing wrong with being a stay-at-home mom at all. It is its own job. It has its own things. It's very much respect those women. That is their job. But there has been a form of it being weaponized, and weaponized in the terms of, isn't this what you want? Don't you want to be like this? I don't have to pay the bills. I don't know what the bills are. We slowly start to see that come. And then that mixed with the, oh, we need to start being feminine. And that, the feminine way of dressing is what we're going to see. And that is what is slowly going to start making its way into fashion, right? We already have this trade wife. We already have this cottage core girly. We already have these things that point towards women being very soft, right? Because you can argue that the revealing clothing isn't soft, right? It may be, I'm just telling you what they are thinking. That's what I'm doing right now. These are not my faults. I'm just telling you what they're thinking. But we can see that revealing clothing as somebody's always going to want to be the opposite. That opposite trend is going to start rising. And depending on how it rise, how it's risen, how it rise is depends on how it's weaponized against you. And with this political party, I'm letting you know it's going to be weaponized against you. And the way that it's going, and the reason that we know it's going to be weaponized against you is because, along with saying this is what feminine energy is, this is how a feminine women dresses, they're stripping away those rights, right? They're taking away, they took down the abortion or women's health website, so aligning with, hey, this is what a feminine woman is. This is how she dresses. They're also slowly starting to define it for you. They're trying to define it for you, and that's the part that we need to be aware of, and that's why people say politics and fashion will go hand in hand each and every single time. And the reason that we know conservative values are going to seep their way into fashion is, beside everything that I just said, we have to look at how the fashion journalists that are deciding to cover the VP wife and the first lady, how they're deciding to cover them. You have to be cognizant of the verbiage that they're using. This is the first time that I have seen, coverage being used and saying this is feminine wear. She is being feminine. They're indirectly telling you these are the women that you need to look for to find a feminine way to dress. This is feminine. I think, what did she wear? Like a big like she wore all white. That's, colors also mean things. That, I feel like that's like a conspiracy, but it's the truth. It's the truth. To not think that somebody has a full thought process and a deliberate mind to everything that goes on, down to what they wear, is naive. It is naive, and that's just as simple as way as I could put it. I will hold your hand when I say that, but it's naive to think that everything is not purposeful. It's it's not, it's just not. I don't want to insult anybody, but it's just naive to think that. The style, the job of a stylist is not just pulling out of thin air. There's a reason that Law calls himself an image architect. You are forming somebody's image, somebody's image. So when we see the VP in white, we see her in very soft colors. We're selling this. This is what feminine looks like. This is what this is. When we look at the president, right? If we even look at that picture, like that picture will tell you everything you need to know about whatever. When we look at that picture and then we look at the first lady and how she is dressing in black and white. She is trying to show you power. She is his wife, and this is what power looks like, which also seeps in conservative values of what a woman is and how a woman is, I don't want to say an accessory to the man, to her man, but we'll say that for lack of a better word. How a woman is essentially an accessory to the man and how she is there to uplift him and his message. So we have the first lady who is wearing all black, who is still wearing clothing that, even though it's black, even though it's powerful, it still shows you the feminine shape. So we're seeing that. And the next, we're seeing the VP in these soft colors. Once again, still showing the feminine shape. And for both of these women, I have like my hands, I'm like yelling at everybody. And for both of these women, they're telling you that that's what feminine energy is. They're telling you that this is how the feminine woman dresses. When I saw that lady in that hat, that was an X for me. When I saw her in that black choker, that told me everything I needed to know. So that's how we're going to move on. We're going to move on because there's so much more to talk about. But do not think that conservative values aren't going to seep into fashion because they already have. They already have. And it's just something that you need to be aware of. You need to be aware of it as one, I'll break it down again, as a consumer, so you know what you're getting, so you know what you're about to see on the runways, and so you know the trends. And as a designer, as a seamstress, you need to anticipate what your consumers are going to are going to want at the end of the day. So if we're already ahead of the trends, this is how we can take some of this good information and either turn it on its head, or this is how we can take some of this good information and do the opposite. And be like, you know what? Actually, women aren't defined as dressing this way. That doesn't just mean this is what a woman is, right? So it really depends on how what your objective is, right? If you're just trying to make a quick buck, I mean, well, there it is. But if you're trying to disrupt and you're trying to change the system, this is knowing the information and knowing what is going to happen and what is to come is how you disrupt. And it's also how you stay on top of everything too. So you also know what's going on. But we had some fashion moves, and we'll talk about those next episode. Talk about some fashion moves. So we have John Galliano leaving Maison Margiela, which if you're not into high fashion, I would say you need to look at Maison Margiela within the last couple of years. When he was there, it was perfection. You will find plenty of inspiration, things to go on your mood board, just so much. It was amazing. Amazing. He had an amazing time there. Great collections. Great use of colors. And yeah, I would say look at that and see where you can draw inspiration. The other thing that happened while I was away is why project shut down. Well, I'm actually kind of sad about that. um, Y Project was under Glenn Martins, which is the creative director for Diesel. So that's important because when we look at brands and luxury brands in particular, which I don't, Diesel is a luxury brand, but it's very entryway luxury for me. It's that price point. A lot of people could meet that. It's very entryway, but Diesel is one of the front runners. That's Bottega. Bottega's a little bit better. Yeah. But Diesel is one of the top five brands right now that we can say are using fabric manipulations in a, I keep on doing chef kisses because that's the best way to explain it, in a great, innovative way. So if you are looking for fabric manipulation inspiration, that's a big word. That's a big sentence for Elmo. Diesel would be it. You need to look at how they're using their denim, how they're taking it apart and turning it into something else. There have been coats that I have seen down that runway that I thought was leather, and it was denim. He's one of the top runners for that. So you definitely need to look at Diesel for that inspiration. But because of his success for Diesel, you have to think about why it's not translating for Y Project, which really shows the turn or the slow demand of luxury fashion. Right. That's one of the big things that we're going to talk about. I don't think it's this episode because this episode is global economics, but in the next episode about consumer shifts, it's where's the consumer in 2025 going? And because of do culture and resale of price, or these, you can call them these other segments of fashion that the consumer is more so navigating towards or going towards, the luxury market, and in particular the independent brands, aren't having as much success as they once did, which is really interesting from my standpoint because one of the predictions that I have, that I've had for really the last couple of years, is that everybody's going to start navigating towards independent brands, or maybe it's just me. I don't think we're in a little bit with this. I will say with this year in particular, and maybe within the next 4 years, we're going to have a group of people that don't want to do big box retail anymore. Like that's going to be their excuse me, their pushback to everything that's going on. So we won't see people that want to shop at Amazon a lot. We won't see people that want to shop at Nordstrom a lot. Whether they are directly tied to what's going on, the consensus is people are starting to get sick of the big brands, the billionaires, the multi-billionaires. They're starting to get sick of this big conglomerate. And what are they going to do? They're going to take their money elsewhere. As we form more of a community, as people say, I don't like what's going on over there, I'm going to go back to my community, people are going to want to spend their money in their community. And whether that be with just smaller brands or whether that be with just their homegirls, like just their homegirls that make books, like, just the friends that doodle and do stuff like that. You may want to start buying their art just a little bit more. And I think that shift is slowly, I think it's slow. I think it's slowly, but for sure happening. And it's interesting to me that that's not happening within the luxury market. Those are independent luxury brands. So it's interesting, and we can read, and how can we read into it? People only wanting luxury for the big brands, for those big people, those big ideas. But the small independent brands, no. There's a lot of stuff that's on Shein that Y Project is the originator. Like, excuse me, there's trends that Y Project greatly influenced. So it's just interesting. That's going to be the word of, that's literally the word of the podcast. It's interesting. And it's really about what can we do with this information and how can we dissolve it or talk about it in a way that affects the greater good in the greater world. Because I personally, once again, it's me, I personally do not believe things happen just to happen. Anything that happens within fashion is a direct reflection of something that's going on in the world, whether it be small and whether it be big. So, one thing in my mind we can infer from this is that the luxury market, there's a low, slow demand for the luxury market, and the brands that are staying in place are the brands that have bigger names that you can recognize when they walk down the street, because brand recognition is always going to be a key point when it comes to luxury brands. So we may start to slowly see smaller independent brands that are trying to build a name but don't have the space to slowly crumble. Cause who else? Maximera. Oof. Oof. Ooh, that was a sad one. Um, I think Ula Johnson. Yeah, I think she just closed her doors. There's there's a couple of them. Why Project has not been the last one. And for the last topic within our party fashion notes, we're gonna talk about some food for thought. Just a quick little pattern observed, and I'm like, maybe you should know that. I'm gonna start this off by saying Emilia Perez. As if you know, you know, but we're gonna get into this. So we have lately been seeing the trend of fashion companies operating as production companies. Did you know that Amelia Perez, the movie that just won all of those, what's that, the Golden Globes, just won a couple Golden Globes? Like, I want to say two or three, no matter how bad the movie is. YSL produced that. YSL was a part of the production company that produced that. And that's not the only brand. That's not the only brand. That's not the only show. That's not the only house that has been introducing themselves as production companies. Let's take a few steps back. It's nothing new. It's nothing new that fashion brands and fashion houses are entering the production world, right? We have designers. I drew a complete blank on the movie, on the creative director, and I was looking this up, and I'll probably post it on Instagram. But we have so many designers that have been costume designers before. We have fashion houses that are making short films. Right now, what we're seeing is a surgence of it. That's the thing. If we think back to 2024, 2023, a couple brands had TV shows. Right now, I'm pretty sure Balenciaga's TV show is out on I think it's on Hulu. But the Balenciaga, like the history of the guy, of the man, that is on Hulu. I haven't started watching it yet. Um, but they're starting to conduct themselves as production companies. So we have to think, is TV the new forefront? Here, I had to do some research. Here's the first thing. The first thing that I want to talk about. House of Gucci. When that movie came out, Gucci saw a 257% increase in Gucci sales. That fact should tell you everything you need to know. That should say it all. They're doing it for placement. They're doing it for placement. They're doing it to get profits back because I haven't done research enough to know is making a movie cheaper than producing a fashion collection. And a part of me wants to say yes because when you are making a movie, you do not have to be the only production team. You could put up the most money and get your name like bigger, but you don't have to be the only one. So I think from that standpoint, it may be worth it. Because of course, if you're representing the movie, you would then costume it. So you're indirectly having a placement guy. You're indirectly putting your clothes and what you want in front of everybody's faces. So you may also reach a broader audience from that standpoint. But within like the last year, YSL in particular, Saint Laurent, has produced over 4 films. One of them with the guy from Last is Last, Pedro Pascal. There's something going on here. There's something going on here. It's clear that it's a money grab, but just be aware. I think I just saw when I was looking this up, LVMH had a meeting with a studio. So with a production studio. So they may be getting into this gear as well. But I'm pretty sure it's on the way. So let's talk about the state of fashion. First off, what is the state of fashion? What's the paper? What's the theories? What is everything? So, the business of fashion, which is a company, a news outlet that just says that just talks about anything fashion. That's all they talk about. It's a great read if you're interested on the business side of fashion. So each year they put together the primary objectives, the primary things that the fashion industry is going to focus on that year. I typically read it every year just to know what's going on, and just because I'm nosy, I'm curious. I like to put puzzle pieces together. That's just the way my mind works. So, like I said, they do it each year and they have industry contributors that come on and say, hey, this is what we're looking at. They interview a lot of fashion executives and they're like, hey, this is our plan for the new year. So it's essentially an all encompassing guide of what the fashion industry will be doing in this year. I read it, so you don't have to. Okay, I read all of it, so you don't have to. So the first, I'm going to do an overall summary of it right now, and then I'm going to get in each section about it as the podcast goes, as the weeks go on. So the main summary of 2025 is that it's going to be rough. It's going to be rough, and it's going to be rough because of all the uncertainty of what's going to happen within fashion this year. And we talk about that in terms of politics and in terms of the global economy and in terms of the consumer shifts. So we have the rise of dupe culture, which will exactly which will reflect the fashion industry. We have climate change that's currently going on. We also have the reshuffling of global trade. That's going to be one of the main things we talk about today, and how global trade affects you and me and what that looks like. So, the main problem that most companies are having in the US is the consumer confidence is all the way down. Consumers are not only not confident in what they're buying, they're not confident in their future, which also goes into the political landscape. The geopolitical landscape is not stable. The economy is volatile. Me saying all of that back to back to back was just extreme. Um, so with this being said, all of these things are going to impact the fashion industry. It's all going to impact how fashion trades, how the consumers and how the consumers shop it. So one of the things that fashion executives are currently looking at that they're kind of depending on is they're depending on volume growth versus price growth. So let me back up a little bit. Each year, the whatever you buy increases. It is what it is. The price of what you buy increases. That's why things aren't the same price that they were in 2022 and 2025. We can directly see that with groceries because that's what impacts everybody on a bigger scale, right? Which is why, sign up for all of this, we can say, why have so many fashion brands really started to focus on food products, right? Within their prints, within their designs, because food has risen and is coming to the point where it can be associated with luxury. Not saying, well, food is a luxury, but the prices are getting so high that people are not eating the same things that they were eating in order to be cost effective, in order to save whatever. Like if you're anything like me, I change grocery stores. I changed grocery stores because I was like, man, it's getting expensive over here. I want to save. I want to do all of these extra things. So, and when I say extra things, let me back up. See, but like that's the problem. You want to do extra stuff. I want to have a healthy life. That's what I mean. I want to have a healthy life and still be able to have a balanced life. And the pay is not going up. I'm not getting that big of a raise currently right now. So what I'm going to do, which is something that a lot of Americans face, what am I going to do? I'm going to go to a different grocery store. We're going to shop different food, right? We got eggs that are $4 or $5 right now. All those protein bros, watch out. Literally watch out. But what fashion companies are focusing on is volume growth instead of price growth. So they're not necessarily going to raise their prices that much because the consumer is already sick of that. The consumer is already tired of prices being raised. So what they're going to do is we're going to focus on volume growth. And how do you focus on volume growth? So instead of focusing on the price growth, they're going to think about strategies that make them different. They're going to think about different price points that they're going to have. So, what does that mean? That means new designs coming up. That means customer experiences. We can say customer experiences. We can look at Nintendo Switch 2 is about to come out. Nintendo Switch 2, which I am a gamer, so you know I will be getting that one. Um, the Nintendo Switch 2, one thing they're doing is they're having a launch experience for people. So you can get these tickets, and if you're in Dallas, LA, New York, you can go experience have a different experience. So we see people doing customer experiences. We see them just getting a new customer in general. So how can we target a different segment of customers? So this is our prime customer. This is our main customer. She's Cindy. Her name is Cindy. We're gonna talk about consumer shifts. She's 18 years old, which I don't know if you want to target the 18-year-old right now. She's 18-year-old. She likes jogging, blah blah blah. What about Cindy Lou? Same person. Cindy Lou, who she's 30, and instead of jogging, she likes hiking, right? It's something that it's still your base customer, which is, oh, I may have been smart to say Cindy Lou, but there's small shifts that are starting to happen. So these are how brands and companies are going to focus on volume growth. So just getting more sales, essentially, that's the instead of raising prices, we're just going to focus on getting more sales. So instead of saying, hey, we're gonna make that item $2 when it was originally one. We're gonna focus on selling that twice as hard, right? So that's what's currently going on. And the first thing that we're gonna talk about is the global economy. We're talking about the global economy, and the only reason I laugh is because we just signed out of hoop. We just decided that we're gonna pull our money and our funding from the health organizations around the world, which they may retaliate, but we're gonna let that go. So, the first thing within the global economy is trade reconfiguration. So, who are we trading with? How are we trading with them? And the barriers in between. So, the major economies are going to diversify. Countries want to make sure they're trading with other countries that have political alignment. And because those things are happening, costs are going to go up. So, a lot of solutions that fashion brands have started to do is they started to double down on diversifying their sourcing in Asia. So, what that looks like is, which we'll talk about the places in a little bit, is that looks like instead of trading with China, actually, we're going to trade with Bangladesh. Instead of trading with China, actually, we're going to trade with India. And then also, what they're doing is something called nearshoring. And nearshoring essentially means bringing your manufacturing closer to home. So you don't have to go through all the trade barriers to get it over here. Because really, I think within the last year or this year coming up, companies have seen like a five times the increase on trade barriers since 2015, which essentially just means that your supply chain flow, which is just how a company makes the product and then gets it to you, is becoming harder, right? It's not as easy as a process anymore tariffs. Who knows? Maybe that could be it. So one of the first things that was observed was there was once a time where the US and China were mainly trading together, right? And then political tensions began to rise. And the US was like, hold on, we can't trade with them because who knows what they're going to do, right? Because besides retaliating, I feel like people think that when you retaliate, it's more like war driven, but it's money driven. So they put trade blocks up. So now it takes that company two times as much effort to get it over here, right? So those political tensions have made really the US and Europe start to look at the rest of the world and the rest of the landscape to see where can we get our goods? Where can we find where can we find what we need? Which is why I said this part is important as a consumer, as a designer, as whatever, because that company may sell you the same thing, but because it's made somewhere different, may not be the same. That goes for beauty and that goes for fashion too. Because it's now made in Bangladesh, they may not have the products that they had in China. So now we're looking at a different product altogether, and you may get it and say, "Huh, I just wore a 29. Why is this new 29 not fitting?" Global trade could 1,000% be the reason. And one of the main issues that China's having in general, which the US is now taking advantage of, which is, whatever, is people went to China because it was cost effective. It was cheap labor, cheap products. I could take it, mark it up, sell it, whatever. But now at this point, we have the cost of labor rising, right? We have the cost of labor rising, and the people are like, "Well, what are we gonna do? What's going on?" Well, if it's the same cost to make it over here as it is to make it in India, I'm gonna make it in India, right? Because at least we have a political alignment, which all of this really started 8 years ago. Who knows who's president? But when we look at the different growth markets in Asia and the rest of the world, we're looking at Vietnam, we're looking at India, Indonesia, and Bangladesh, right? Those are where we're going to start to see our products become made. And that goes for textiles as well. So the clothes, the fabric that we are sewing with is going to look different, right? Once again, of the quality that they may have in China may be a little bit different from what they have in Bangladesh, from what they have in India. And if a company does not move fast within this segment and make these new bonds and make these new relationships with manufacturers, we may see them start to crumble. Right? We just saw Joann's, which I didn't talk about for Party Fashion Notes. Joann's just filed for bankruptcy again. But so besides, okay, we're not just going to source, we're not just going to trade with China. They're also doing something called nearshoring, which we talked about a little bit in the beginning. So if it's passed, there is an Americans Act that, will provide companies with $14 billion, not each company, but they'll flood the industry with money to do nearshoring. And nearshoring just means you're bringing the manufacturing closer to home, right? So now let's talk about that for a little bit because you may think, okay, that's great. That's amazing. They're going to bring it back to the US. That's not what I said because that's how they're going to phrase this. They're going to phrase this as we're bringing manufacturing back to the US with this American Bill Act. That's not what that means. They're bringing manufacturing closer to them. Now, what is the closest? Latin America. Within the last year, Latin America has had a 65% increase in manufacturing. That is where everybody, all these companies, are pulling their money and pulling manufacturing. They're pulling it to Latin America. Now, if we take a step back, that includes Mexico. That includes Mexico. Now, if we take a step back and everybody that was in Latin America said, hey, you know what? I'm going to come to the US for a better life, for more money, for this and for that. And then somebody decides, actually, we're going to deport everybody back. Where are they going to work? What's going to happen? Where are they going to work? At what? These manufacturing plants that are starting to open. So, what we can infer, which you may be like, that's a big jump, Karina. It's not that big. It's not that big. It is a win. Politically speaking, it is a win on both sides. Not only do you get these people that don't like immigrants, but also you're feeding an industry of labor. You're feeding this, the fashion companies, you're feeding all of this manufacturers, you're feeding them labor, which now, because they're over there, we can start to cut labor costs. But who am I? What do I know? Okay, the next thing that's also really big within the global economy, like I just said, is going to be the Asian new growth markets, which essentially is India, Japan, and what did I say? Bangladesh, Vietnam, um, all those places. Essentially, what you need to understand from this, which we talked about within the last segment, is we are now discovering new growth markets within Asia that aren't just China because of political alignment. Companies are now getting themselves out of deals with China as China's economy takes a plummet, right? And not let me back up. Not a plummet. Not a plummet. But it's not doing as good as they once were. But we see Japan. Japan has one of the best growths within the luxury market. We see India. India had one of the best growths within textiles, within the luxury market as well. We're going to start going over there. And when we talk about nearshoring, um, another great example I just thought about this would be Shein. Shein gets her stuff made in Turkey, right? And then also, you have to think about this from the perspective or the consumer side of everything. With, I'm 100% sure, within the next couple of months, made in China is going to be a bad thing. It is. And they're going to rephrase it as, oh, this was made in Bangladesh. This was made in India, right? Because when we think China, we think cheap, we think cost effective. And if you're a sustainable girl, you probably like, oh, sweat camps and not sweat camps, sorry. What's it? What's it called? Sweatshops. You're gonna think sweatshops. You're gonna think of all these things. But when you think India, when you think Bangladesh, when I said India, you probably thought of the beautiful textiles they have. When I said Bangladesh, you probably thought of all the textiles, all the fibers, all of the fabrics, all of the weaving they do from scratch, right? That's what we think of. So those other markets in Asia also have a better, we'll say, name behind them. They have something that you could take a hold of and say, actually, I can work with that, right? So that's the global economy. That's what we're looking at for the state of fashion. Next week, we're going to get into consumer shifts, ha, which is interesting. The values have started to shift within your consumers, which is always a big thing for customers, for brands to like get a hold of. There's also something now called the silver spenders. I'll let you guess what that means. I'll let you guess what consumer that is. And that is who companies are going to start targeting. So I'll maybe leave that as a question. Who are the silver spenders? And if you know, maybe I'll ship you some free fabric or something. Also the discovery of reinventing themselves. So once again, we talk about companies, how they're in the beginning, I talked about how companies are setting themselves apart. What are they doing to make themselves different? That also just means different, like I said, different designs, different price points. We may see some of the brands make a mark, and then a mark by Marc Jacobs, and then a mark by Jacobs. Like, we may see a couple of brands have a little bit more diffusion lines. A couple of luxury brands have that. But meet me back for another episode of Press and Pins next week. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I would love to say sorry for the ranting and the raving within the first 5 minutes of the episode, but I'm kind of not. So, Toodles, soulmates, have a great day designing.